Imagine for a moment a figure who walks the dusty roads of ancient Judea, a teacher whose words shatter complacency and whose presence rearranges the hearts of those who encounter him. Imagine that same figure slipping away at dawn, leaving behind the crowd and the obligations, and sitting alone in quiet, eyes closed, focused on something more real than the bustle around him. What if I told you that this daily retreat into silence was not a quaint habit, but the hidden engine of everything he taught? What if the reason Jesus meditated every day is the missing key that could change how you understand prayer, power, and the path to inner freedom? I promise you revelations in this video that will alter the way you see the life of Jesus and the practice you may already be neglecting. The last revelation is the most important and powerful of all, and it will be delivered in the final part of this series. Imagine now that meditation is not an exotic import to Christianity, but is woven into its deepest seam, a living practice that connects human beings to the source of wisdom. In this exploration, we will travel through historical evidence, spiritual insight, and practical guidance. We will examine the role of silence and inner discipline in the life of Jesus, trace echoes of Hermetic teachings and mystical currents, and show how daily meditation shaped his ability to speak truth that pierced the ages. We will also investigate why adopting a similar discipline could transform your own life, strengthening compassion, clarity, and courage. Stay with me, because the most powerful insight arrives at the end, and it will change how you practice meditation forever. If you value this journey into hidden wisdom, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, comment with your thoughts and questions, and share this video with someone who seeks deeper meaning. I promise you revelations that may shift how you comprehend life and the cosmos. Throughout this first part, we will answer three foundational questions. What did meditation mean in the cultural and spiritual world of Jesus? What evidence do we have that he practiced it daily? And why did it matter so profoundly for his teaching, healing, and moral courage? To support our exploration, we will draw on the work of scholars and mystics who have studied early Christian practice, comparative religion, and contemplative disciplines. We will reference the historical scholarship of Elaine Pagels on early Christian diversity, the spiritual anthropology of Houston Smith on religious practice across cultures, the contemplative studies of Thomas Merton and Richard Rohr on Christian mysticism, and the modern neuroscience of John Kabat-Zinn and Mathieu Ricard regarding the transformative effects of meditation. We will also consider Hermetic and esoteric sources, including the Corpus Hermeticum, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, which illuminates the perennial interest in inner knowledge across Mediterranean spiritualities. To begin, let us set the scene. First-century Palestine was not a spiritual vacuum. It was a crossroads of Jewish prophetic tradition, Greco-Roman philosophical schools, and mystery religions that prized inward transformation. Jewish practices of prayer and fasting frequently involved withdrawal and silence. The Psalms and the prophetic tradition are full of inner lament and inner listening. The Essenes cultivated communal rituals and solitary contemplative practices. At the same time, the broader Mediterranean world offered Stoic and Platonic resources for contemplative discipline. In this environment, a man like Jesus could draw on an array of practices that encouraged stillness, attention, and inner vision. The New Testament itself provides glimpses that cannot be dismissed as incidental, scenes where Jesus withdraws to pray before key decisions, where he fasts in solitude for extended periods, and where he speaks of the kingdom of heaven as an inner reality, suggest a sustained inner life. The Gospels report multiple instances of withdrawal to solitary places at dawn and at night, making solitude a repeated pattern rather than a one-time event. From the Garden of Gethsemane to the hills where he prayed before major moments, these textual traces point to a life ordered around inner communion. Elaine Pagels and other historians have emphasized the diversity of early Christian practices, noting how the earliest communities experimented with different forms of prayer and silence. Thomas Merton, drawing on the contemplative tradition, argued that silence and solitude are not escapes, but entrances into the living center of truth. But what exactly did that inner discipline look like? Meditation in the first century would not have been a standardized technique labeled by modern categories. It was a posture of listening, of focused attention, of aligning one's will with the will that creates and sustains life. It involved breath, word, attentive hearing, and an openness to revelation. This is consistent with descriptions across mystical literature, where meditation is less about emptying and more about creating a space where an inner voice can be heard. The Hermetic tradition, for instance, speaks of gnosis as an inner sight that awakens when the soul is stilled. Richard Rohr describes contemplative prayer as a movement from thinking about God to experiencing God, from concept to presence. Jesus' words about the kingdom of God being within the seeker resonate with this inward turn. There are practical, psychological reasons why a daily habit of meditation would empower Jesus as a teacher and healer. Meditation sharpens attention, increases empathy, and strengthens emotional regulation. Modern studies by Jon Kabat-Zinn and others demonstrate that consistent contemplative practice changes the brain in ways that foster compassion and clarity. A person who meditates daily becomes less reactive and more able to respond from depth rather than habit. For a figure confronting entrenched power structures, calling out hypocrisy and offering an uncompromising call to love, such inner steadiness would be indispensable. It explains how he could speak with prophetic courage and act with a compassion that did not dissolve in the face of opposition. As we continue in the next part, we will examine specific gospel episodes as case studies of meditative grounding in action, investigate parallels in Hermetic and Jewish mystical texts, and begin to translate these ancient practices into concrete steps you can use today. Remember that the most powerful revelation awaits in the fourth part, where I will unveil the single practice that synthesizes everything we discuss and can be integrated into your daily life to produce dramatic transformation. Imagine the quiet moments before dawn in the hills of Galilee, when the world is still wrapped in shadows and the air carries the scent of olive trees. In these early hours, Jesus often withdrew to what the Gospels describe simply as a lonely place. But this loneliness was not emptiness, it was the atmosphere of inner awakening. Scholars such as John Dominic Crossan note that these scenes are not decorative details, but signs of a disciplined spiritual rhythm. He argues that the structure of Jesus' day reveals a pattern, public teaching balanced by private immersion in silence. This rhythm is common across mystical traditions, from the desert prophets of Israel to the sages of ancient Egypt, who taught that wisdom flows from stillness. Houston Smith wrote that every religion points toward the same principle. Only a quiet mind can hear the truth beneath noise. When you picture Jesus rising before sunrise, you are seeing a man committed not to ritual for its own sake, but to a daily return to the source of his strength. Consider a scene that often passes unnoticed. Before choosing his closest disciples, the Gospels say Jesus spent the entire night in prayer. Why would a teacher who spoke with so much authority need such extended solitude before making a decision? Because meditation clears perception. It reveals which impulses come from fear and which come from clarity. It opens a space where inner wisdom can surface. The Hermetic writings describe this as the moment when the mind becomes a mirror, able to reflect the light of the divine without distortion. By spending hours in focused stillness, Jesus refined his ability to choose wisely, to see beyond appearances, and to sense the deeper potential in those he called to follow him. Imagine applying this level of inner alignment to your own choices. How many mistakes could be avoided if you cultivated the same discipline of listening before acting? Another revealing moment appears when Jesus calms the storm while crossing the Sea of Galilee. This episode is usually interpreted as a miracle performed outwardly, but some scholars suggest an inner layer that parallels meditative teaching. The storm symbolizes the turmoil that rises inside every human being when fear takes over. The disciples panic, as most of us would. Jesus responds with calm authority. This contrast is a demonstration of the power cultivated in silence. Thomas Merton once wrote that the greatest storms are the ones we carry within. Jesus' ability to face chaos without being consumed by it echoes the teachings of Jewish mystics who believed that the heart can become so anchored in the divine that external circumstances lose their power to destabilize the soul. This is the fruit of daily meditation, and it is available to anyone willing to practice with persistence. Even his parables carry signs of contemplative insight. When Jesus speaks of the seed that grows in the dark or the treasure hidden in a field, he is pointing toward processes that unfold invisibly before they become visible. Meditation works the same way. It nurtures transformation beneath the surface until sudden clarity breaks through like a harvest. Houston Smith noted that the world's great teachers do not invent truth, they reveal it. Meditation is the method that clears away the debris so revelation can be seen. This explains why Jesus' teaching resonated so deeply with those who were ready to hear. His words were not theories, they rose from lived inner experience. A lesser-known but profoundly significant example appears in the way Jesus responded to hostility. When confronted by critics, when questioned aggressively, when tested by those who sought to trap him with words, he remained composed. Psychological studies today show that meditation strengthens the brain's ability to pause before reacting. This pause creates space between stimulus and response, allowing a person to choose from wisdom instead of reflex. Richard Rohr describes this as the contemplative mind state, where identity is anchored not in ego, but in awareness. Jesus embodied this state. His ability to forgive, to love enemies, and to avoid being manipulated by provocation came from a centeredness cultivated daily. Imagine how your relationships would change if you approached conflict from this same grounded clarity. Historical writings outside the New Testament also shed light on this practice. Jewish historian Philo of Alexandria described meditators of his time who used breath awareness, repetition of sacred words, and still contemplation to approach the divine. While Philo lived slightly earlier than Jesus, his descriptions match the environment Jesus would have known. Early Christian mystics such as the Desert Fathers practiced a form of meditation known as hesychia, meaning inner quiet. Rooted in traditions they believed traced back to Jesus himself, they taught that silence is the furnace where the heart becomes pure. This is not accidental continuity, it is evidence that the earliest followers saw meditation as central, not optional. Now consider how meditation influenced the emotional depth of Jesus' compassion. Every time he healed, forgave, or comforted the suffering, he acted from a place of profound empathy. Modern neuroscientific research by Mathieu Ricard and others shows that compassion practices increase activity in areas of the brain related to empathy, understanding, and emotional regulation. A life immersed in daily meditation would naturally deepen the capacity to feel what others feel without being overwhelmed. This explains why Jesus could enter the pain of others, touch the untouchable, and speak healing to wounds that were emotional as much as physical. Meditation did not distance him from the world, it opened him to the world more fully. Ask yourself, what would happen if you dedicated even 10 minutes each morning to the kind of silence Jesus embraced? What storms might calm? What decisions might become clearer? What relationships might heal? Leave your reflections in the comments, because your experience may inspire others traveling this same path. In the next section, we will explore how ancient Hermetic principles intertwine with the meditative life of Jesus, how early mystical texts reveal hidden layers of meaning, and how you can begin adopting these ancient practices in a way that strengthens your spiritual journey. The most powerful revelation still waits in the final part, where we will bring everything together and unveil the practice that transforms meditation from a habit into a doorway to profound awakening. Imagine opening a scroll written 2,000 years ago, its edges worn by time, its ink faded but still alive with meaning. As you unroll it, you find ideas that seem astonishingly modern: the pursuit of inner clarity, the transformation of consciousness, the belief that the divine is not distant but intimately accessible within. These ideas appear in Hermetic writings, in early mystical commentaries, and in teachings linked to communities devoted to inner purification. Now consider that Jesus lived in a world where these currents flowed freely. While his message was rooted firmly in the Jewish prophetic tradition, he also embodied a universal wisdom that resonated with seekers across cultures. Scholars such as Karen Armstrong and Geza Vermes highlight how the spiritual landscape of the ancient Mediterranean was far more interconnected than many imagine. This interconnectedness helps explain why the meditative life of Jesus aligns with Hermetic principles that describe the cosmos as a mirror of the human soul. One of the core Hermetic insights is the idea that the microcosm reflects the macrocosm. In other words, the universe outside mirrors the universe within. Jesus expressed this same truth when he spoke of the kingdom of heaven as something that grows inside a person. This is not metaphorical ornament, it is spiritual physics. Meditation is the method by which a person enters this inner kingdom, exploring regions of awareness that often remain hidden beneath noise. Hermes Trismegistus wrote that knowledge of the divine arises when the mind becomes still enough to perceive the order that holds creation together. Jesus' teaching echoes this principle when he calls listeners to seek first the kingdom, promising that outer transformation follows inner alignment. The parallels are not accidental. They reveal a shared understanding among ancient mystics that silence is the gateway to revelation. To appreciate how profoundly meditation shaped Jesus' teachings, consider the Sermon on the Mount. Its focus on purity of heart, non-reactivity, forgiveness, and inner intention reflects the consciousness cultivated by regular contemplative practice. When Jesus instructs listeners to pray in secret, withdrawing from the public gaze, he is encouraging the same inward turn described by Hermetic and Jewish mystical traditions. Thomas Merton emphasized that contemplation is not a technique, but a transformation of perception. The Sermon on the Mount reads like the ethics of someone who lived from this transformed perception every day. It is the blueprint of a heart aligned with the divine through consistent inner discipline. Now imagine Jesus walking through the bustling marketplaces of Capernaum or the crowded courts of the temple. Amid the noise and the disputes, he speaks with a tranquil authority that seems out of place in such chaos. This tranquility was not a temperament, it was a practice. Daily meditation trained him to carry silence within him, allowing him to remain steady in situations that would agitate most people. Modern contemplatives such as Thomas Keating write about this phenomenon, describing how regular meditation creates an inner sacred space that remains untouched by external turbulence. When Jesus confronted corrupt temple practices or challenged the powerful, he did so from this interior sanctuary. It gave him the courage to stand for truth without hatred and to love without fear. This same interior sanctuary is available to you, waiting to be uncovered through the discipline of daily meditation. Consider the Hermetic idea of inner illumination. Ancient texts describe a moment in meditation when the mind becomes flooded with light. Not physical light, but a luminous awareness that reveals the interconnectedness of all things. Jesus often spoke in images drawn from light, the light of the body, the lamp of the soul, the city set on a hill. These metaphors reflect someone who experienced inner illumination directly. Richard Rohr explains that light is a symbol for unitive consciousness, the state in which separation dissolves and the divine presence becomes increasingly tangible. If you have ever experienced a moment of profound clarity, even briefly, you have touched the edge of this state. Meditation expands it. It trains the heart to remain open to insight and guidance. In this exploration, it is important to acknowledge that early followers of Jesus recognized meditation as foundational, not optional. Writings from early Christian mystics, such as Origen and Evagrius Ponticus, emphasize the necessity of inner stillness for spiritual growth. They believed that Jesus taught not merely moral principles, but a way of inner transformation. Evagrius wrote that a person who prays truly is a theologian, meaning that true understanding arises from direct experience, not abstract study. This lines up with Hermetic teaching that knowledge of the divine comes through inner awakening rather than external doctrine. These parallels show that meditation was not a later addition to Christian spirituality. It was present from the beginning, woven into the very fabric of how early seekers understood the path of Christ. Let us now turn to the emotional dimension of this practice. Meditation not only enhances clarity, but softens the heart. Jesus' ability to feel compassion for the poor, the sick, and the marginalized did not arise from pity, but from deep identification with the suffering of others. Mathieu Ricard's research on compassion training shows that meditation increases activity in brain regions associated with empathy. This scientific insight helps us understand how Jesus could carry such immense compassion without being overwhelmed. It also suggests that anyone who adopts a similar practice can develop the same capacity for love that is both tender and strong. What would it mean for your own life if you cultivated this kind of compassion? How might your relationships, decisions, and sense of purpose evolve? Another aspect often overlooked is how meditation sharpened Jesus' storytelling. His parables are masterpieces of simplicity and depth, offering layers of meaning that unfold gradually in the mind of the listener. This is a hallmark of contemplative insight. Mystics across traditions often express profound truths in poetic language because meditation attunes the mind to metaphor. Houston Smith noted that mystics speak in symbols because symbols point to realities that words alone cannot capture. Jesus' parables function the same way. They invite listeners into reflection, encouraging them to experience truth rather than merely understand it intellectually. This experiential dimension is central to both early Christian mysticism and Hermetic wisdom. All of this leads to a crucial realization. The reason meditation played such a dominant role in Jesus' life is not merely because it cultivated peace or clarity. It is because meditation opened the doorway to communion with the divine presence he called Father. It is the foundation of his spiritual authority, the source of his wisdom, and the wellspring of his compassion. When you meditate, you are engaging the same inner pathway he walked, entering a silence where divine guidance becomes more audible. And this awareness brings us closer to the final and most powerful revelation waiting in the last part of this series. Before we reach that final insight, the next section will show you how to bring this ancient practice into your own daily life, how modern science confirms its transformative power, and how the teachings of Jesus and the Hermetic tradition converge into a practical method you can begin using immediately. The final revelation will synthesize everything we have explored and present the single practice that unites Jesus' daily meditation with the spiritual awakening accessible to every seeker today. Imagine now that the centuries between you and Jesus dissolve for a moment. You are standing beside him on a quiet hillside, the sunrise spilling gold across the earth. He closes his eyes, breathes deeply, and enters the silence that sustained his life. There are no words, no rituals, only presence. What he experiences in that stillness is the same reality available to you now, not through belief alone, but through practice, through the discipline of turning inward each day to listen. This is the heart of the mystery we have been unfolding. The reason Jesus meditated every day was not to escape the world, but to be fully alive within it. The same path that guided him can guide you, and what you are about to learn is the single practice that can transform meditation from a moment of calm into a lifelong awakening. Let us begin with what modern science reveals. Studies in neuroscience have shown that consistent meditation reshapes the brain, strengthening regions responsible for empathy, focus, and self-awareness, while quieting the centers linked to anxiety and fear. This means meditation literally rewires your capacity for peace and compassion. Researchers like John Kabat-Zinn and Andrew Newberg have found that meditative prayer, focusing deeply on love, gratitude, or divine presence, produces measurable changes in brain chemistry. When Jesus entered solitude to commune with the Father, he was engaging in a process that balanced emotion, regulated stress, and renewed vitality. It was not magic, it was mastery of inner alignment. The miracle was not that he withdrew to pray. It was that he returned from prayer radiating strength, clarity, and unshakable love. Now we reach the hidden principle at the core of his practice, the one secret that unites ancient Hermetic wisdom, Jewish mysticism, and the teachings of Jesus himself. It can be expressed in 3 words: silence, breath, and awareness. These 3 form the trinity of inner transformation. Silence creates space for the divine voice. Breath anchors you in the present moment. Awareness opens the doorway to communion. Every day Jesus entered this trinity. The silence was his temple, the breath his prayer, the awareness his union with the source of life. The Hermetic texts describe a similar pattern. Still the senses, unite breath and mind, and awaken to the one. The Jewish mystics called it devekut, the clinging of the soul to God. Jesus called it abiding in the Father. Different languages, one reality. You can practice this right now. Sit quietly, close your eyes, let your breath settle. Feel the air entering and leaving your body as if it were the rhythm of creation itself. When thoughts arise, let them pass like clouds across the sky. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that observes them. In this awareness lies peace. In this peace lies wisdom. In this wisdom lies communion. This is how Jesus lived, not occasionally, but daily. Every dawn he entered this sanctuary of silence, and from that place he acted, spoke, and healed. You do not need to be a mystic, monk, or scholar to follow this path. You only need willingness and constancy. As you develop this discipline, you will begin to notice subtle changes. You will react less and perceive more. Compassion will arise spontaneously, not as a moral effort, but as a natural expression of awareness. You will find that forgiveness becomes easier, patience deeper, and gratitude constant. These are not signs of withdrawal from the world. They are marks of engagement with reality as it truly is. Jesus lived among crowds, taught in storms, and faced persecution, yet carried peace because he had made peace his inner home. Meditation is how you build that same home within yourself. It is not a technique, it is a return to the divine center that has never left you. Think about the promise he gave. The kingdom of heaven is within you. For centuries, this phrase has been repeated without fully being understood. It was not a metaphor, it was instruction. The kingdom is a state of consciousness, the awareness of unity with the divine. Meditation is the door through which you enter that kingdom. Each breath is a step inward. Each moment of silence is a key turning in the lock. The Hermetic sages taught that the divine mind fills all things. Jesus demonstrated it by living as if that presence was immediate and personal. The more you cultivate stillness, the more this truth becomes undeniable. The divine is not somewhere else. It is here now, breathing you, guiding you, loving through you. At this point, some may ask, is meditation prayer? The answer is yes, but it is a kind of prayer that goes beyond words. Words are bridges. Silence is arrival. Jesus taught verbal prayer, the Our Father, the blessings, the Psalms, yet he also moved beyond them into silence. When he said, "The Father knows what you need before you ask," he revealed that true prayer is not information, but intimacy. In meditation, you are not telling the divine what to do. You are remembering who you are in relation to it. The mystic Teresa of Avila described this as a silent love. It is in this silence that guidance arises, not as a voice from above, but as a resonance from within. This is how Jesus discerned his path, how he knew when to speak and when to remain silent, when to heal and when to move on. His clarity was the fruit of daily communion. Let us end with the final and most powerful revelation promised from the beginning. Meditation was not only Jesus's practice, it was his message. Every parable, every healing, every act of compassion was a living demonstration of the inner state cultivated in meditation. When he said, "I and the Father are one," he was describing what happens when awareness becomes so clear that separation dissolves completely. This is the destiny of every soul. Meditation is not a ritual of escape, but a rehearsal for union. When you enter silence, you enter the same field of consciousness that Jesus lived in every day. You are not merely remembering him, you are experiencing the same presence that moved through him. So what should you do now? Begin where he began, with silence. Each morning, before you face the world, give yourself to stillness. Breathe, listen, be aware. Allow the mind to settle like clear water after a storm. Do not expect visions or voices. Expect peace. From peace, everything else will unfold. When challenges arise, return to that silence. When confusion appears, return to that breath. When the world feels divided, return to awareness. This is how you follow in his footsteps, not by imitation but by embodiment, not by belief but by direct experience. Remember, Jesus did not meditate to become divine. He meditated to reveal the divinity already within him. The same divinity lives within you. Through meditation, you awaken it, not as theory, but as living reality. In the words of Meister Eckhart, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. That eye is opened through silence." May you find your own place of stillness as he did, and there discover that you are never alone, that the light you seek is the light you are, and that the real reason Jesus meditated every day was to remind us all of the eternal truth. The kingdom of heaven is not distant but alive within every breath you take. Thanks for looking.